Pablo, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? First one in, let's go. Scott, you're the second one in. Let's go. How you doing? How you been, brother? Good evening, Miles and all CMF. JP, good to see you as well, brother. How you doing? How you been? Hi, Miles. Harry, good to see you as well. How you doing, Harry? Long time. How you been? Good evening, Miles and family. Ian, good to see you as well. How you doing? How you been, brother? Let's go. Curtis, good to see you as well. How you doing, brother? Let's go. Evening, Miles. Lee, good to see you as well. How you doing? How you been? Second today, man. I'm a little slow. Let's go, Scott. Hyper Sniper, good to see you as well, brother. How you doing? How you been? It's been a while. I was first. YouTube is just slow. Fair enough, Curtis. Doing good. Thanks for asking, Miles. Let's go, Scott. Hi, everyone. Good to see you as well. One love. How you doing? How you been? Good evening, Miles and CMF. Manny, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Share the live. Let's go, Scott. What's the Miles? What's up, CMF? Kerry, good to see you as well, brother. How you doing? How you been? How's things? Hi, Miles, CMF family. Everyone, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Good evening, Professor Miles. Funky brother, good to see you. How you doing, brother? How you doing? So, let's go through the intro and disclaimer and essentially what we're going to go through on tonight's live. And then by that time, everyone is tuned in for the first part. Just like always, we have a mixture of news to go through on tonight's live. We have news coming from essentially every country regarding the crypto space. Well, before we go through that, welcome to the CMF Live if you're watching this for the first time ever. The CMF stands for Crypto Mouse Family. My name is Miles. You can tune to this live Monday to Friday, 10 p.m. London time for the latest updates and news regarding essentially in cryptocurrency, CBDCs, AI, politics, regulations, pretty much everything you need to know about regarding the world completely transforming into a digital space. We also do Q&As on this live as well, which means if you ever do have any questions, put it down in the comment section. More than happy to help you out. The disclaimer of this live, as always, is not financial advice, not political advice, and whatever I say is only for entertainment purposes. And this is episode 349 of the CMF Live. So welcome everyone to episode 349 of the CMF Live. Just want to take 1 second to say thank you so much to everybody from the CMF who has already liked and retweeted this live if you're watching this on X. And thank you so much to everybody essentially on YouTube who's watching right now who's already liked the live as well. If you haven't done that, CMF members, please take 5 seconds to like and retweet this live if you're watching this on X. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please just drop a like as well. Right now, we're already on 4 retweets and 4 likes on X. Let's see that climb on those numbers. Now, we have a mixture of essentially news to go from tonight's live. We have news regarding essentially Bitcoin ETFs and Ethereum ETFs and why the market is, going through some volatile stages right now. We're going to talk about the Fed on tonight's live. Also, we're going to talk about some Trump news, some Bank of America news, Brazil news. Essentially, we have a lot of international news to go from tonight's live, Italy news, and so on. And a mixture of essentially other news to go from tonight's live. Also, as always, we have the Ripple news to go from tonight's live as well. But that's more like towards the end of the live. Now, the first news we are going to be covering on tonight's live is essentially regarding Bitcoin ETFs and Ethereum ETFs and regarding BlackRock and essentially what's going on over there that's causing some market volatility right now. Before we go through that news, let's just go inside the comment section first and then we go straight into the first news. Let's see where we're at. We were at here. Just retweeted. Thank you so much, Funky brother. Miles, can't wait for another fantastic evening. Let's go, Addy. Let's go, Scott. Also like the live. Let's go, Funky brother, for liking the live. I've been playing all the replays on my lunch breaks. Let's go, Harry. Thank you for that. Thank you for the replays. Thank you so much. How have you been, Miles? Been doing good, Funky brother. Still on your meds? Not anymore. No, no more meds until I have to get an MRI scan somewhere down the line. They're still trying to figure it out. You feeling okay today, Miles? I'm feeling great today. Hello, everyone at CMF. Bull XRP, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? I'm on holiday and I'll miss you all. Let's go, Bull XRP, on vacation. How tall are you, man? If you want to know how tall I am, I'm the same height as Tom Cruise. That should give you an answer of how tall I am. Now, BlackRock is what we're going to talk about on tonight's live. It's the first news we're going to cover on tonight's live. BlackRock, essentially regarding Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs, there's essentially a situation of outflows happening, which is essentially adding to the whole market situation of market volatility. So here it is. BlackRock made waves this week with major moves in both Bitcoin and Ethereum markets, essentially Bitcoin and Ethereum ETF markets. The world's largest asset manager has just transferred over $292 million in Bitcoin and $372 million in Ethereum to Coinbase Prime, which is suggesting that is BlackRock getting ready to sell some Bitcoin and Ethereum through their ETFs, through essentially Coinbase Prime. Essentially, these transfers suggest a likely sell-off, sparking concerns across the crypto landscape right now. The actions followed the significant, essentially, outflows from BlackRock's top ETFs, IBIT for Bitcoin and Ether, essentially, for Ethereum. As a result, both Bitcoin and Ethereum prices dropped, with essentially ETH falling below $3,560, essentially, and Bitcoin hitting the lows of near $112,700. BlackRock's iShares Ethereum Trust offloaded a massive 101,000, essentially 975 Ethereum, worth roughly $375 million. This marked the single largest, essentially, day of outflows since Ethereum, essentially, ETFs launched on BlackRock. The move ended essentially a 21-day inflow streak for the US spot Ethereum ETFs and contributed to a total of $465 million in outflows across all Ethereum, essentially, ETFs that day. Despite this, Ether essentially still added around $9.3 million of new, essentially, ETF purchases for Ethereum, showing that inflows weren't completely halted at present, and BlackRock's Ethereum, essentially, ETF managers over $10.7 billion in assets. Interestingly, the drop essentially comes just weeks after Ethereum ETFs saw record inflows of $726 million, essentially back in on July 16th alone, with BlackRock essentially contributing over $499 million to that. These large swings essentially show just how volatile institutional flows can be. And it's not just BlackRock that's essentially pulling back. Fidelity and Grayscale's Ethereum ETFs also essentially saw sizable outflows, adding fuel to the sell-offs. BlackRock's Bitcoin ETFs, known as IBIT, also faced some storm. The fund essentially lost $292.5 million, its biggest single-day outflow in over 2 months. Fidelity's Bitcoin essentially ETF followed with $40 million in outflows, with Grayscale's essentially GBTC saw around essentially $10 million in exit. Combined, US essentially spot Bitcoin ETFs recorded their second largest single day loss, over totaling $812 million in outflows. The move wasn't isolated. According to Arkham Intelligence, BlackRock shifted essentially 2,544 Bitcoins to Coinbase Prime, further suggesting a sale. This follows a pattern where essentially ETF shares or redeemed funds essentially often sell their underlying assets, while some redemptions may now happen in kind, essentially, for meaning ETF shares can be swapped for coins themselves. Large transfers to exchanges usually signal essentially incoming sales, and this appears to be exactly what's going on right now. Last month, Ethereum and Bitcoin ETFs saw huge inflows, essentially helping push the prices to new highs. Bitcoin surged essentially last month to a record high of $123,000, and Ethereum essentially reached a 6-month near high as well. Much of this growth come from institutions piling into ETFs. BlackRock alone, essentially BlackRock by themselves, recorded essentially $5.43 billion in Ethereum ETF inflows in July, marking the largest essentially portion of total Ethereum ETF market flows. However, August has brought a sharp reversal with all the inflows that's been happening into Bitcoin, Ethereum ETFs essentially in last month. This month, there's been outflows essentially that's been happening on BlackRock and Ethereum. With prices now essentially falling and profits locked in, many investors are pulling back. Experts say that this wave of outflows reflects classic, essentially profit-taking behavior, which is pretty much normal, especially after a strong rally. And while ETF essentially redemptions don't always lead to essentially asset sales, which is correct, even though essentially someone like BlackRock taking some of their Bitcoin, putting on essentially Coinbase Prime, it doesn't necessarily mean 100% essentially they're going to be selling off their Bitcoins or Ethereum just because they moved to Coinbase Prime account. It's just there's a chance of it being sold off, but not 100% chance of it being sold off. Always remember that when you hear news regarding BlackRock or any other ETF or any other essentially big account or big whales moving certain amounts of money, certain amounts of crypto to exchanges, it doesn't necessarily mean 100% they're going to sell. These essentially recent events leave many asking what's next for crypto ETFs. BlackRock's role essentially is central, as the firm manages enormous chunks of Bitcoin and Ethereum exposures through its ETFs. When it moves the entire market, it reacts, and right now it's moving a lot. The short-term outlook remains uncertain. On-chain data essentially suggests continued institutional interest with new wallets accumulating Ethereum right now, but large sales and fund outflows could continue essentially to weigh in on that matter. For now, BlackRock's ETF decisions are the market's biggest signal. Investors would be essentially wise to watch their next move closely. In summary, while July was very bullish for essentially ETFs or Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs, August has opened with a clear shift. BlackRock's ETF essentially moves have shaken both Bitcoin and Ethereum markets, and the next few weeks will likely determine whether it's just temporary pullback or the start of something bigger. What I can tell you right now is that essentially we're going to very soon have Ethereum staking capabilities for ETFs, which is, it should help the price essentially of Ethereum push up ever so slightly due to having ETF essentially staking capabilities. It should make it a much more appealing asset essentially as an ETF for Ethereum. Bitcoin, on the other hand, I mean, it's just the scarce of essentially having a limited amount of token is always going to be there for its push at a much more higher level. But nevertheless, that is essentially caused some sort of market volatility. And obviously, the other thing that's still causing market volatility is rate cuts, which the Fed is just reluctant to not do rate cuts whatsoever, even though there are now members inside the Fed that are turning on Jerome Powell and going against what he stands for. So, crucial Fed rate unlikely happening soon. What essentially the Bank of America's CEO Dyer is warning right now. The Bank of America's CEO has come out with his own perspective regarding essentially Fed rate cuts right now. So here it is. The financial world is buzzing essentially with a significant announcement from the Bank of America. Brian, the Bank of America's chief executive officer, recently shared his insights that could shape our financial futures. According to his reports by Walter on Bloomberg, he conveyed that Bank of America's own economists do not foresee a Fed rate cut happening in the near term. This perspective is rooted essentially in the expectation that taming inflation will take longer than many essentially initially hoped for. If the Federal Reserve maintains its current stance on interest rates, it has significant implications for everyone, not just essentially the stock market, but the crypto market also, and any other market space out there, from individual consumers to large essentially corporations. A prolonged period of higher interest essentially rates impacts borrowing costs, savings, and investment strategies, which essentially includes stocks and crypto. Also, for instance, mortgage rates, car loans, and credit card interest will likely remain elevated, making borrowing more expensive. Savers might also see slightly better returns on their essentially deposits, though those often don't keep pace with the true cost of living if inflation remains essentially much more higher rate. Businesses also essentially face higher costs right now for capital, which can affect their expansion essentially on expansion plans or even hiring. This complex economic outlook requires careful financial planning. Borrowing costs expect higher rates on new loans and potentially variable essentially rate debts. Savings accounts and certificates of deposits may offer more attractive returns. Investments, fixed income investments might become more appealing, while growth stocks could face headwinds due to higher discount rates. Many have essentially eagerly anticipated a shift in the Federal Reserve's monetary policy. However, the latest commentary from the Bank of America is essentially the perspective that's just come out. Top brass essentially suggests that patience is key right now, is what Bank of America is suggesting. The core reason for this cautious stance is the persistent challenge of high inflation that's going on. While there have been signs of moderation, the pace of decline isn't rapid enough for the Fed to consider easing its tight monetary grip. So the Fed is not giving up whatsoever by the looks of it. Even Bank of America is coming out and saying, we don't see the Fed doing rate cuts in essentially this year happening at all. We're pretty much seeing it essentially next year is going to be rate cuts. The longer the Fed essentially stands on the stance of we're not doing rate cuts, and the longer they hold the market back, the bigger the blast off is going to be when they do end up essentially doing rate cuts. So if they hold the market back long enough, it's just think of it as pulling back essentially some sort of a rubber band. The more the Fed keeps on pulling back the market with a rubber band, and then eventually when they do rate cuts, essentially the market is just going to let go of the rubber band and it's just going to blast off stock market and crypto market. Also, what's adding to the volatility towards the market space right now is that tech stocks are not doing too well at all, pretty much. Not, drastically bad, but tech stocks are not doing too well either. Regarding the new reports that has came out regarding AMD, essentially chipsets and other chipsets, that situations that are going on, which Bitcoin tends to follow essentially tech stocks as well. So there's a lot of things and scenarios and macroeconomic essentially events that are adding to the market volatility right now. But let's not forget the biggest thing. We just got regulations. So think of it as the market is making room for institutions. So don't essentially focus too much on, obviously, rate cuts and so on. They're going to be happening essentially now or even later on. Probably not now, but later on, rate cuts are going to be happening. But the main thing everybody should focus on is, let's not forget the main point. And the main point is, we just got regulations. We got our first regulations inside the United States. We had the White House telling the SEC and CFTC to work with crypto companies. We had the essentially CFTC yesterday announcing a new project called Crypto Spirit, which is supposed to bring this innovation back to the United States. And then the SEC announcing essentially Crypto Project, which is also their version of bringing innovation back inside the United States. So there's a lot of positive things happening inside the market space, and we're going towards this institutional regulation sector, especially with the first law that was passed by senators and essentially signed by Trump regarding the Genius Act. The Clarity Act still needs to be signed by Trump, and so does the Anti-CBDC Act. So there's a lot of things happening on that basis of regulation. So let's not forget those main factors. Short-term situations like this means nothing when you look at the bigger picture when it comes to cryptocurrencies. A lot of things are happening if you look at essentially bigger picture. As my father always says to me, don't look at the tip of your nose, look much more beyond that. If you look at the tip of your nose, you're only going to be seeing essentially Jerome Powell not doing his job properly, tech stocks going slightly volatile regarding the whole essentially back and forth with the Chinese market space and so on. But if you look beyond your nose, essentially you see the regulation that was passed by the United States. You see what the CFTC and the SEC are doing with their visionary projects they're creating to bring innovation back inside the United States. You see the amount of institutions lining up to join the crypto space. You see the amount of ETF applications that are going on, or on an essentially global basis, the amount of regulations that are happening right now. Everybody that's following America's footsteps, going from South Korea to Singapore to Hong Kong to the EU to the Middle Eastern countries that are essentially following America's footsteps, the regulations. So that's what happens when you look beyond your nose and you see the bigger picture. Short-term picture is Jerome Powell maybe do rate cuts, maybe he doesn't do rate cuts, and tech stocks getting volatile regarding Chinese chipsets and American chipsets and AI stuff. Look beyond that, you see the bigger picture. Now, before we go through the news, the next news on tonight's live, which is regarding Trump, and also regarding essentially, Trump telling essentially a lot of governmental essentially organizations to stop throwing hurdles for the crypto companies. Before we go through that news, let's go inside the comment section first, and then we'll go straight into the next news. As I said previously, this is live, which means if you do have any questions or misstatements, put it down in the comment section. More than happy to help you out. So let's see what's happening inside the comment section first, and then we'll go straight into the next news, which is quite an interesting next news as well. Let's see where we're at. Hello, Miles and TT. Good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Hey, Miles and family. Comatose. Good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Happy Pisces. Good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Hello, Miles and CMF. Orphan. Good to see you. How you doing? How you been? 18 XRP ETFs coming. Let's go, Brett. I don't get why someone would say how tall you are. You are a top man and very intelligent. Thank you so much, Ali, for the kind words. Right on, Scott. BlackRock will probably get an XRP ETF as soon as they apply, and I bet no one else will get approved until BlackRock. Hi, Miles. Richard, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Brett, I agree. And Scott, I agree. I have a strong suspicion that Satoshi era wallets will rug pull BTC and will go straight into XRP. All signs point to that. I'm certain that the creators of BTC are the XRP creators. It's an interesting perspective, Brett. Some people have had the same perspective as well, and you know what it is. I agree with some of that. The rest, I don't disagree with it. Just to put it that way, I don't disagree with the rest of it, but I don't know if I agree with it either. But the first part regarding the Bitcoin era wallets, the Satoshi era wallets, rug pulling the market space, I said that that's a possibility of happening a few years essentially back. I said there's a possibility of that happening. This is why it's quite dangerous for countries to create essentially some sort of Bitcoin wallets and treasuries and so on, and then the founder essentially of Bitcoin pulls the market plug. So it's quite dangerous buying into something that you don't know who created it, and that person who created it holds a substantial amount of that certain asset. So I agree with some of that, yes, 100%. If it goes into XRP, even better. Hi, Miles and family. Alex, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Hi, Miles and CMF. Stormy, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Hello, Miles. Woodhouse, good to see you, brother. How you doing? How you been? It's past 2012 in Greece. Let's go Woodhouse on vacation. Hey, Miles. Hi, Miles. Stopping for a few. We'll watch the rest later. No problem, Artistic. Good to see you. How you been? Now, Trump. Trump is proposing an order to protect crypto firms from debanking situations. So the White House, under President Trump's directive, prepares an executive order targeting essentially banking practices against essentially digital asset firms, marking a shift from previous administration essentially policies. Certain banks right now don't like the idea of companies like Ripple applying for a banking charter license. Even though Circle has applied for a similar license, Circle is part of that crypto mafia, essentially, the founder of Cardano was talking about up to a certain extent. But certain banks don't like the idea that Ripple has applied essentially for a banking charter license. And those banks, one of those banks being essentially JP Morgan, because it's just obvious they don't like the idea of that. So the White House is coming with essentially an executive order to stop what's happening inside the banking world, where some banks might be weaponizing themselves or essentially weaponizing certain politicians to still go after crypto companies. The White House wants to completely put an end to it from every angle. For example, JP Morgan, essentially JP Morgan Bank was the first one to announce that they're going to start charging fintech companies for data sharing. Now, you're not supposed to do that in any sort of a way. Technically, it is against the law. Banks that essentially all have the same licensing inside the United States and Fed master accounts are supposed to share data with each other. That's just how it works. But JP Morgan is suggesting they're going to share, essentially, if they want to share with fintech companies, i.e. Ripple, then they're going to start charging for data, which is absolutely ridiculous. Just shows the amount of hatred JP Morgan has towards certain companies, i.e. Ripple. Now, this order could significantly impact US crypto firms by reducing essentially banking risk, promoting financial inexclusivity, and potentially reshaping the crypto market landscape. The White House under President Donald Trump prepares an executive order that would fine banks for dropping customers associated with digital asset firms. Even better, the White House is going to go around and even fine banks. So if a bank essentially decides to drop their customers because they're involved in cryptocurrencies or because they are essentially a part of a crypto company, then that bank inside the United States is going to get a fine for doing that essentially scenario, for essentially dropping their customers, for being associated with any sort of crypto companies. This marks a policy shift from prior administrations that restricted crypto access. In the past, obviously, banks weren't allowed essentially, and some banks didn't like the idea because they know they're going to be replaced by crypto and so on. But it's great to see that essentially Trump is taking this initiative to essentially fine banks that don't essentially, work with crypto companies, decide to just not work with them for some ugly reasons. Led by President Trump, the order targets banks penalizing crypto-related firms for ideological reasons. It instructs regulators to investigate and penalize discriminatory essentially practices. Industry figures like essentially CZ view this as an opening opportunity for crypto. It's brilliant because it means JP Morgan can no longer essentially make up its own rules if they want to reject crypto companies or essentially crypto users and so on. They can't do that anymore because they'll be fined by the White House or penalized, let's just say. The order could benefit essentially crypto businesses by reducing operational risk and improving banking access. The case of Bank of America dropping a non-profit is cited in all the drafts. The impacts essentially are all the major US facing digital asset companies. Financial and market impacts include a potential reduction in banking barriers for essentially crypto assets and large cap crypto assets. CZ sees this as an opportunity for enhanced crypto banking worldwide. This could level the playing field for US crypto firms. It used to be that the corresponding banks in the US block transactions involving crypto, fiat for buying crypto in other words. This potential order opens banking for cryptos internationally, CZ said. Historical parallel exists with Operation Choke Point 2.0 under Biden, which essentially pressured banks to debank crypto firms. The new order coming from Trump seeks to reverse such measures, benefiting tokens tied to the US DeFi protocols. So a token like XRP is going to do quite well with this new executive order coming from Trump, because when Ripple essentially gets its licensing for its banking charter, it can essentially work with other banks inside the United States, and other banks inside the United States have to work with companies like Ripple. If they don't work with crypto companies, they could be penalized by the White House. Potential outcomes include increased banking access and reduced operational risk for crypto entities. Industry experts are supportive, essentially seeing this as a move towards reducing financial barriers and promoting market competitiveness for digital assets. This is pretty much a nightmare for JP Morgan, but it's a losing battle for traditional banks. Let's just be honest with ourselves. Fintech, essentially, fintech banks are the way of the future, but essentially blockchain banks are the way of the future. And this law essentially is going to make life very difficult for traditional banking systems to be able to compete the same way they used to in the past, because they can no longer reject crypto companies or reject crypto users. Otherwise, they'll be penalized and fined by the White House, according to the new essentially executive order that's coming from the United States from Trump. This is amazing news. Honestly, amazing news. Anything to make essentially JP Morgan more furious is always funny to watch. Now, Italy is what we're going to talk about next on tonight's live. But before we talk about Italy, let's go start a conversation first and see where we're at. And then we'll go straight into the Italy news. Let's see where we're at. Let's go CMF. JP, good to see you as well, brother. How you doing? How you been? Ian, let's go. Let's go CMF. Let's go JP. Hi, Miles at CMF. George, good to see you as well. How you doing, brother? How you been? Once again, thank you so much to everybody from the CMF who has already liked and retweeted this live. If you're watching this on X right now, CMF members, thank you so much to everybody who has already retweeted and liked this live. If you haven't, CMF members, liked or retweeted this live on X, please go and like it and retweet it. So far, we have 7 retweets on X and 8 likes on X. If you haven't liked or retweeted, please like and retweet. If you watch on YouTube, drop a like as well. Now, Italy essentially, Bitcoin reserve debate is going on right now. Is Italy going to be having a Bitcoin reserve or not? Is the major debate that's going on over there right now. So the Italian MP essentially highlights of Italy discussing a strict Bitcoin reserve following the United States footsteps into creating some sort of crypto treasury, though Italy remains unprepared to implement such a reserve soon. The debate underscores growing governmental interest in Bitcoin as a reserve asset, impacting essential perceptions but not immediate market actions. Given Italy's cautious approach and current lack of policy change, Italian essentially member of parliament has called for discussions on establishing a Bitcoin reserve. This follows the United States' recent move to create its own reserve, sparking international dialogue about digital asset holdings. Now, we know where the EU stands. The European Central Bank has, in the past, penalized essentially any European country thinking about creating some sort of a Bitcoin reserve. If I'm not mistaken, it was Bulgaria. I think they were thinking about doing some sort of Bitcoin reserve, and the European Central Bank told them you're not allowed to, which then they dropped the entire agenda. But then they came out with the idea of creating essentially a basket of assets that they can put inside of it, and that was okay. But just creating a Bitcoin reserve was not okay, and the European Central Bank was completely against it. But now Italy is having a conversation of can we not, should we or should we not? So a prominent voice in Italy's digital asset policy, Copo, emphasized that essentially these talks, although Italy is not ready to implement a reserve soon, right now just a Bitcoin reserve, he highlighted that the need for public and institutional essentially perspectives joining in would be better. The debate has raised questions about national digital asset strategies within Italy. While the idea has gained some traction, immediate changes in government policies or even market behavior have yet to be observed, as discussions are still primarily. The financial implications of establishing such a reserve include potential diversification benefits for Italy. However, Copo acknowledged essentially institutional adoption is still in early stages with low public awareness and a major essentially hurdle. It's not essentially far-fetched for other countries to follow in suit. He continued, Italy does not have the conditions to establish such a reserve right now in the coming months, but suggested that the debate essentially, that they're having right now could possibly lead to a yes of some sort of a crypto reserve later on. The announcement has essentially initiated discussions in financial and political sectors worldwide regarding should essentially certain countries have crypto reserves or not. Historical trends suggest that while policy announcements can influence market sentiments, actual economic essentially impacts often encounter delays due to regulatory complexities. Potential outcomes include increased scrutiny of digital assets and considerations of Bitcoin for a sovereign essentially reserves. Data from similar past initiatives indicates regulatory hurdles that could slow essentially adoption, despite growing essentially public and governmental interest in cryptocurrencies as a legitimate asset class. So Italy right now is going back and forward in their policy systems of should they or should they not create some sort of a Bitcoin reserve. It seems like Italy's on the side of no for the time being of creating a Bitcoin reserve. And as I said previously, the European Central Bank has rejected some European countries on just creating a Bitcoin reserve. And then when they got rejected, one country in the EU suggested creating a basket of essentially of assets which wasn't rejected and wasn't approved either, but it wasn't rejected, let's just say. Now, Indonesia. So moving off Italy, where they don't know if they want to create a Bitcoin reserve or not, Indonesia, on the other hand, is adding Bitcoin to its national reserves. Indonesia is reportedly exploring the possibility, essentially, of adding Bitcoin to its national reserve. So completely opposite perspective of what Italy is going through right now. A move that could mark a significant shift in how the country approaches digital assets. While discussions essentially are still in the early stages, officials are said to be studying the potential benefits and risks of holding Bitcoin alongside traditional reserve assets like gold and foreign currencies. This step would place Indonesia among the small but growing list of countries that are embracing Bitcoin not just as an investment, but as a legitimate store essentially of national wealth. As one of Southeast Asia's largest economies, Indonesia is always looking for ways to strengthen its financial stability, including Bitcoin and its reserves that could offer several potential advantages. Diversification: Bitcoin is not tied to any single economy or government, making a unique asset that could hedge against inflation or geopolitical instability. I just want to point one thing out. One thing that everybody keeps on mentioning regarding Bitcoin that is a bit of a lie, and maybe not, until it's proven who created Bitcoin. The idea that Bitcoin is not tied to any single economy or government is now, it's neither here or there, because we don't know who created Bitcoin. Bitcoin could have ties to a government, but then there's the topic of, oh well, Bitcoin, even if it does have ties with any sort of government, if it was created by a certain government or certain group of people that might be related to a government, they still don't control the entire network, and the people essentially that maintain Bitcoin's network, or the nodes essentially, they control Bitcoin's network. So even if there is a communication of a government that was created Bitcoin, it doesn't matter, because it's the people that are maintaining the network that are controlling it. Yes and no, because the person or the group or the government that did create Bitcoin still holds a substantial amount of wallets and a substantial amount of Bitcoins, the Satoshi era, essentially, wallets. So the topic of, everybody keeps on saying Bitcoin is not tied to any government or essentially any single economy. We don't know if it is or if it isn't. That's the issue. But global trends: other nations like El Salvador have already added Bitcoin to their reserves, and some central banks also essentially are also exploring digital currencies. Technological progress: Indonesia's interest aligns with its broader digital finance goals right now, including the development of central bank digital currency, CBDCs. Indonesia, just like the other countries in the Southeast Asia, are very big on CBDCs. 98% of centralized banks are on CBDCs, according to the International Monetary Fund and the Bank of International Settlements. However, this approach is not without challenges. Bitcoin's price volatility and regulatory uncertainties remain major concerns in Southeast Asia, such as Indonesia. But for countries willing to tolerate some risk, the long-term upside may be worth the gamble. Indonesia has seen a rapid rise in cryptocurrency adoptions in recent years. The country has legalized crypto trading in 2019, and its Commodities Future Trading Commission regulatory agency recently launched a national crypto exchange in 2023. Essentially, they did that. These moves highlight a progressive stance towards digital finance right now, and indicates the inclusion of Bitcoin in the national reserve is more than just a speculation. It's a logical next step. Whether or not Indonesia ultimately adopts Bitcoin essentially as a reserve asset, the fact that it is even considering such a move is a testament to how far crypto has come in mainstream finance. I agree 100%. The crypto space going from speculative or Ponzi scheme or pyramid scheme to now essentially countries adopting essentially into their reserves and so on. Yes, crypto has come so far by a mile. Facts. It's come so far, to be fairly honest. Now, Trump is what we're going to talk about next. And we're going to talk about essentially that yesterday on this live, on episode 348, which was yesterday of the CMF Live, and today is episode from 349. So yesterday's live, I explained that Trump apparently is choosing people to replace inside the Fed, and essentially the sources that have been coming out from the White House, that Trump is getting ready to replace people inside the Fed and replace some other members as well. For example, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, because Erica lied, according to Trump, regarding the data of the labor market and so on, which Trump didn't like, and she's also part of Biden's nominees that she's essentially being removed. But now Trump has apparently mentioned that who is going to be the replacements. So yesterday it was essentially White House sources, but today it came out Trump's own mouth. So here it is. Trump considers essentially Hassett and Walsh for Fed chair role. Kevin Hassett and essentially Kevin Walsh emerge as front runners for the Federal Reserve chair after President Trump publicly mentioned them, highlighting, essentially heightening the interest in their potential impacts on monetary policies. Leadership changes at the Federal Reserve often influence market essentially expectations, potentially affecting volatility in dollar-valued assets, and including cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, Solana, and so on. Donald Trump has identified Kevin Hassett and Kevin Walsh as leading candidates for the Federal Reserve chair. These individuals are seen as frontrunners. Trump essentially remarked notably on both Kevins, he said, both Kevins in his recent statements. Observers note that significant implications essentially for the US monetary policy. Kevin Hassett, the head of the National Economic Council, is one of Trump's top mentions right now. He stated, "I think the president will choose the person that he likes and is not going to be essentially Jerome Powell. As decision maker, essentially Trump seeks the replacements following Powell's essentially term, aiming to reshape monetary policy with familiar faces and potential leadership roles. The potential appointees essentially of new Federal Reserve's leadership is creating speculations about the future US economic policy directions. Changes to the chair could influence market perceptions and also reactions, impacting interest rate essentially expectations and financial markets significantly. Historically, such monetary leadership changes influences the dollar's value, and by extension, dollar essentially denominated assets like essentially Bitcoin, which affects the rest of the market space. But if we do get regulations, then essentially we can decouple from Bitcoin's footsteps and go into utility, which would be a lot more better. Market volatility often raises with uncertainty as stakeholders watch for policy shifts. Historical precedents emphasizes the importance of the Fed's role in global financial markets. As the International Monetary Fund puts it, if the American market sneezes, the world market catches a cold, which is facts. In past Federal Reserve chair nomination cycles, markets have reacted to potential policy shifts affecting both equity and crypto markets. The 2017 cycle caused notable market movements as investors reevaluated economic forecasts with new chair potentials. So Trump is getting ready essentially to choose, he has chosen two people to replace Jerome Powell right now, and both of them are named Kevin. That's why in his speech he said both Kevins are essentially, on the basis of to replace Jerome Powell. Now, is it going to be when Jerome Powell's term comes to an end, or is it going to be they're going to find something on Jerome Powell and kick him out somehow? But the two Kevins have been chosen, and both Kevins are quite pro-crypto. And essentially, they're going to be working in favor of the crypto space. Now, Japan is what we're going to talk about next. So, moving off Trump news to Japan. Osaka Exchange considers cryptocurrency futures and option introduction. So, Japan's Osaka essentially exchange, a part of Japan's exchange group, is exploring potential of launching cryptocurrency futures and options aligning with global standards and growing institutional demand. The Japanese exchange right now is getting ready for entering essentially inside the crypto space by offering some sort of crypto ETFs or even tokenization of cryptocurrencies towards the Japanese market space. And the Japanese market space is doing a lot more better than it was essentially last year, to be fairly honest. This essentially initiative is significant for expanding Japan's digital asset market, potentially increasing institutional essentially participation and liquidity towards crypto assets. Osaka Exchange, part of Japan's exchange group, is advancing the introduction of cryptocurrency futures and options to bring more institutions from the Japanese market space towards the crypto space, which means more liquidity will be entering towards the market space from Japanese institutions towards cryptocurrencies. This initiative involves Osaka Exchange and Japan Exchange Group's CEO Yuko, essentially, noted cryptocurrency products as candidates for the next phase, highlighting regulatory monitoring with Japan's financial service industry. This could impact the financial market in Japan by attracting institutional capital and following global practices right now. The primary cryptocurrency involved would be starting with Bitcoin, Ethereum as standard assets for such derivatives and essentially going beyond, which the next asset is essentially XRP, Solana, and so on. Market participants anticipate increased liquidity and institutional flows into cryptocurrencies from Japanese market space. Such developments mirrors trends in regions like the US and Hong Kong, where similar introductions expanded the market depth. The Osaka Exchange potential move engages regulatory developments with the Financial Services Agency. These actions align essentially with Japan's midterm business strategies for digital assets. Financial outcomes could include enhanced market maturity and new product offerings aimed at regulatory approval. Historical trends from regulated essentially markets also indicate benefits like increased volume and essentially also volatility, promoting crypto asset growth. They ended it with saying, we will thoroughly consider various overseas essentially specifications and conduct research to determine whether they are suitable for Japan as a primary step, said essentially the president of Osaka Exchange. So Osaka Exchange is getting ready to bring cryptocurrencies to institutions in Japan, which means a lot of liquidity is going to be entering towards the market space. So, we do have this little volatility stage going on inside the market space, but don't forget about the bigger picture. The bigger picture right now inside the crypto space is the amount of institutions that are entering the crypto space, the amount of regulations that are happening globally, and the amount of banks that are getting ready to enter the crypto space. A lot of things happening on a global base, which are all massively positive for the crypto space. What everybody is essentially very focused on is what's happening on a minuscule level, which is the slight volatility that we have essentially inside the market space, or the geopolitical tensions that are going on, which affect the market space for 1 or 2 days, or the tariff situation, which again affects the market space for 1 or 2 days and it goes back to normal and so on. The bigger picture is globally, regulations, institutions, banks, and also most importantly, utility after all of that. Now, SEC is what we're going to talk about next on tonight's live. But before we talk about the SEC, let's go inside the comment section first. As I said previously, this is live as usual. If you do have any questions or statements, put it down inside the comment section. I'm more than happy to help you out. So let's go inside the comment section first before we go through the next news on tonight's live, which is regarding the SEC. Let's see where we were at. We were at here. Trump is the GOAT. Let's go, Stormy. What up, Miles and CMF? Ray, good to see you. How you doing, brother? How you been? Hi, Miles and CMF. Golden Dragon, good to see you. How you doing? George, good to see you. How you doing? Let's go, Ray. Now, SEC. SEC modernizes stablecoin rules and eases regulatory barriers right now. So the SEC is actually doing a lot of positive, bringing a lot of positiveness towards the crypto space. Quite a bit, actually, to be fairly honest. So the US SEC has updated its guidance on stablecoins, classifying some dollar peg variants as cash equivalents if backed by secure redemptions and mechanisms, reflecting Chairman Paul Atkins' regulatory shift. This could enhance stablecoin adoptions and institutional finance, impacting asset flows and evaluating their status within financial systems. You could pretty much say that the SEC has just given the green light to stablecoins. SEC essentially changes were announced under Paul Atkins' leadership today, aiming to modernize regulatory stance. Stablecoins with a secure redemption mechanism linked to reliable asset classes can now be classified as cash equivalents. Stablecoins can be classified as cash equivalents, in other words, legal tender now, by the SEC's terms. They haven't mentioned which ones, but we know which ones essentially. This change means major entities can hold stablecoins that are securely pegged to the US dollar without essentially registering them essentially as a security. This regulatory adjustment could potentially redefine the financial landscape by classifying certain dollar peg stablecoins as cash equivalents. The SEC is paving the way for their essentially increased use within institutional settings, enhancing their financial credibility, definitely by calling them cash equivalents, and usability. Market responses indicate optimism, with stakeholders approaching the SEC's, appreciating the SEC's newest approach that was announced today. Although essentially public declarations from key leaders like Paul Atkins are awaited, the sentiment in financial sectors right now leans positively towards this regulatory leniency. Industries globally are watching closely right now of what the next step the SEC is going to be taking, or the CFTC. SEC decisions will lead to an increase in stablecoin market capitals as institutions geared towards regulatory defined assets, it definitely will. Not only do we have a green light from the essentially president of the United States regarding the Genius Act, but now we also have the SEC pretty much giving stablecoins a green light. The move could encourage further technological integration, strengthen their financial foothold, and as the Commission continues to modernize its approach to digital assets, this guidance essentially ensures US market participants may account essentially for redeemable stablecoins using the same standards as other essentially cash-like assets. More prominent risk controls are evident, Paul Atkins said, the chairman of the SEC. So, the chairman of the SEC gives a green light to stablecoins and calls that essentially some stablecoins can be considered cash equivalents, and some stablecoins don't even need to register as securities with the SEC anymore. The only ones that can be considered cash equivalents are the ones that are fully transparent with the SEC regarding their reserves, so that the SEC is reassured that this particular stablecoins actually has the reserves they are essentially saying that they do have to back their stablecoin. So we know for a fact that essentially RLUSD is going to be approved by the SEC. We know for a fact that USDC is going to be approved by the SEC. And USDT, well, they're not even an American company. Just put it that way. USDT is not even, Tether is not even an American company, and essentially their headquarters are based somewhere else, which is already a red flag for the United States. And they have been fined once for lying about their reserves, where they were fined in a New York court for around $14 million, if I'm not mistaken. Now, but it's great to see the SEC giving a green light. You can see the SEC is moving day by day towards this innovation sector by creating crypto project, and now essentially green lighting stablecoins. This is great news coming from the SEC. Now, here is some interesting news that's come out as well. Also weird news, you could say, very weird news. Max Keiser claims Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, whoever it may be, or which group it may be, or which government it may be, Max essentially he's a vocal Bitcoin advocate who does, a lot of massive speeches at these Bitcoin events and so on. And his newest opinion, he knows where Satoshi Nakamoto lives. So we might not know what Satoshi Nakamoto looks like, or if it's just one person or a group of people, but apparently Max Keiser knows where Satoshi lives. And his suggestion is that the founder of Bitcoin, the creator of Bitcoin, lives in El Salvador, Bitcoin country. Max Keiser, a vocal Bitcoin advocate, essentially, and an advisor to El Salvador's president, recently made a fascinating claim about the identity and location of Bitcoin's mysterious creator, Satoshi Nakamoto. Essentially, according to Keiser's tweet, Satoshi resides in El Salvador, which he refers to as Bitcoin country. So this man is one of the advisors for El Salvador's president, and he's claiming that Bitcoin lives in El Salvador. In a tweet, Max Keiser presented Satoshi as a spellbinding wizard molded on essentially Gandalf's riding the waves on the surfboards while brain shedding essentially a wand and donning pointed hats. The artwork casts Satoshi as a near mythic figure infusing the discourse, a mysterious Bitcoin creator with mystical flair. Keiser's commentary echoes El Salvador's expanding status as a leading authority on Bitcoin adoption worldwide. In 2021, the nation seized the spotlight for essentially when it became the first essentially anywhere to designate Bitcoin as a legal form of tender formally. In the wake essentially of that decision, El Salvador has undertaken bold measures to integrate Bitcoin into its economy, most notably by launching a Bitcoin beach, a pilot project designed to encourage the use of Bitcoin in everyday transactions, and announcing a forthcoming Bitcoin city. Max Keiser's notion that Satoshi resides in El Salvador reinforces the idea that the nation is emerging as a central nexus for world of cryptocurrencies. And nevertheless, Even essentially aimed the ongoing debates about its economic essentially ramifications, El Salvador's essentially embrace of Bitcoin has cast it as a central figure in cryptocurrency arenas. The government persists in challenging the substantial resources in the Bitcoin infrastructure with the objective of turning essentially the nation into a crypto-friendly economy. Kieser's tweet essentially likewise came in the recent incident in Laguna, Switzerland, where a life-size essentially statue of Satoshi Nakamoto vanished before being found nearby a river. It's true, there was a statue of essentially the founder of Bitcoin in Switzerland, which one person decided to steal. And later on, they found it essentially next to a river. But designed essentially in tandem with Tether and Plan B, the status serves as a testament to Bitcoin's genius. They're saying because Tether's headquarters is in El Salvador was the first Bitcoin country. Therefore, in their eyes, Satoshi Nakamoto lives in El Salvador. Taken together with Kieser's tongue-in-cheek suggestion that Satoshi has relocated to El Salvador, the incident underscores the persistent essential intrigue and enigma surrounding Satoshi Nakamoto and the imprint he has left on the country's essential cryptocurrency realm. Kieser's tweet reinforces the idea that El Salvador, with its bold Bitcoin initiative, is not just a country embracing digital assets, no, but it's a place where Satoshi Nakamoto lives. Now, I would say take that with a grain of salt. I wouldn't say that's take that as gospel in any sort of a way regarding, Satoshi Nakamoto living in El Salvador. But, this, by the way, this isn't a random person just sending out a random tweet. This man is the advisor for the president of El Salvador. So it's not just a random, influencer or somebody trying to make a joke out of it. This is the man that advises a president of a country, of El Salvador, coming out and saying, because Tether's headquarters are in El Salvador was the first country essentially to greenlight Bitcoin as a legal tender. Therefore, we see it as essentially Satoshi Nakamoto relocated to El Salvador and he lives in El Salvador. Take this as a grain of salt is what I would say. Don't take it as gospel in any sort of a way. But, as JP has just said inside the comment section, and essentially Susie has said the plot thickens. I guess so. And what JP has said, I've heard it all now. Same, I've also heard it all now. I could never imagine an advisor to a president saying those words, but take it with a grain of salt. Now, U.S. essentially rallies against Asian nations regarding AI regulations is what we're going to talk about next. But before we essentially talk about that, let's go inside the conversation first. Let's see what's going on in there, and then go straight into the next news on tonight's live. Hello again from India. How you doing, Ashkin? From India. That makes sense. Mouse, El Salvador. Let's go, Ian. The plot thickens. I've heard it all now. Hollow Mouse and CMF. Let's go, Peg. Good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Like, share, and comment, please. Facts. CMF members, if you haven't liked or shared or retweeted this live, please like and retweet this live. If you're watching this on X, if you're watching this on YouTube, just drop a like and a comment even outside the live as well. Good evening, Miles and CMF. Hope everyone is well. Good to see you. SB, how you doing? How you been? Now, US is not happy with the essentially Asian market and the EU market regarding AI regulations. But here is what their new perspective is. So the US rallies Asian nations against the EU's AI regulation for now. The Trump administration is encouraging Asian nations to reject Europe's strict AI regulations, according to the news reports. The US campaign essentially to get Asian countries to reject the EU and Chinese AI models involves an initiative essentially based approach with tech packages arranged for each country's needs. The Trump administration has launched a diplomatic and commercial push across Asia, encouraging countries in the region to reject what is called Europe's model of fear and overregulation. Michael, essentially the White House technology advisor and the director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, passed this message while addressing regional officials and business executives during a visit to South Korea today. Michael warned that this model will restrict essential innovation and slow down progress in important areas of technological advancements. He urged Asian governments to develop independent regulatory approaches suitable for their local context instead of importing European rules. He also used the opportunity to push against calls for worldwide oversight of AI, especially those coming from China. This stance directly counters recent comments made by essentially the Chinese Premier Li, who pushed for the formation of a global AI governance body at the World Artificial Intelligence Conference in Shanghai. In Shanghai, essentially they said that the world should be on the same level when it comes to AI. Everybody should be having the same rules and everybody should work together in an AI world. The US has a different perspective, that China shouldn't be the one taking lead of this global AI initiative that we're heading towards, because the US doesn't trust China and China doesn't trust the US. The White House is offering monetary support to countries willing to align with its AI vision. So the US has came forward and said any country that aligns themselves with the US will be heavily, essentially, gifted in that sense. Michael said that the US will begin to offering financing options to help countries acquire and deploy a full stack of American technologies packages, which will be tailored to individual nations. The strategy promotes products made in America and places the US as a counterbalance to China's increasing tech influence in Asia. China does have a massive advantage inside the Asian market space because the amount of essentially, China is just number one when it comes to producing anything. But the US has the more advanced chipsets by far, where the Chinese always try to steal the US ideas. And, there's not the Chinese people, it's the Chinese government that's doing this, essentially. They're stealing American, essentially, ideas and on chipsets, on innovation, on AI, and so on. It's been happening for the longest time. So if the Asian countries align themselves with the US, they will receive a massive financing package from the US. If they join the US on this AI venture, the US will, fund their countries and fund their AI projects, essentially. If they align with China, then they're going to get very old tech compared to what the US is offering them, and they won't get any financing either. So it's a interesting package the US is offering, to be fairly honest, for a lot of these countries. Beijing has been pushing its AI outreach in recent, essentially, times, promoting language models developed by local companies like Alibaba and DeepSeek. The country has also been exporting low-cost AI-driven products to developing markets, presenting China as a willing partner to share the benefits of its AI developments in the process. This is especially attractive to countries seeking affordable technological solutions. It is true, China is obviously going to be offering cheap solutions for AI products to these countries, but the US is going to be offering them finance packages and AI tools. So that makes it a lot more appealing, essentially, as a country that's not doing too well, to go with the US. Because those countries that are not doing too well in Asia, they could go with China by buying cheap AI tools, or they could just go with the US, that, essentially the US is going to finance those tools for them. Works out better for them. This US essentially hopes to downplay the momentum by putting out the risk of depending on Chinese tech, while also providing irresistible alternatives. Michael's appeal is based on his previous experience as the US government chief technology officer, during which he took part in global efforts to convince countries to remove Hawaii from their essentially important infrastructure. Some people criticized the US on when the US said remove Hawaii phones and products. Some criticized the US and said they're threatened by Chinese phone manufacturer like Hawaii, because Hawaii makes better phones than essentially Apple. And as true as that may be, or not true whatsoever, the US was right. Hawaii phones were essentially government phones, you could pretty much say, made by China. Easiest way to look at it is that there was a news article that was released from China regarding Hawaii phones, and this news was released last year, where the Hawaii manufacturer has released a chipset essentially for Hawaii phones, where the government essentially can automatically, essentially work fully implement your CBDC wallet, your Chinese CBDC wallet, your social credit system, and so on, are all built in within Hawaii phones. So regarding essentially China was using Hawaii phones as government phones to control its own people and maybe steal data, could be very possibly true, because Hawaii is actually going to be the first phone manufacturer in the world to become some sort of a government phone, where the citizens that buy that phone, automatically have a CBDC wallet and some sort of, social credit platforms, or essentially carbon footprint platforms attached to it. Now, obviously, it's not going to be all rolled out at once. It's going to be a step-by-step process. The first one is going to be the CBDC wallet. But the US was kind of right regarding essentially China being, creating Hawaii as some sort of a government tracking data type of tool phone. Now, moving on from that to Brazil, but there is a back and forward going on right now between the US and China, and the US doesn't want to lose the Asian countries, and some people might criticize the US for essentially the United States of America's footsteps by suggesting to finance Asian countries essentially to join the US, and some might criticize and say that we don't want to pay for Asian countries as a US citizen and so on, which is very understandable. But if the US doesn't get the market share in the AI essentially world right now, starting now in the early stages, then the US will definitely lose the AI race in a few decades' time. Let's just put it that way. So it's either the US prepares itself and essentially onboards as many countries as they can, so they can have a control of the AI space. Otherwise, if they don't do that, China is going to be the one essentially that controls the AI market space, which isn't going to be that great, to be fairly honest. China is a very restrictive country. If you think the speech ban inside the UK, or essentially the social media ID checking that's going on, or the website ID checking that's going on right now in the US, essentially in the UK or in the EU is bad, it's nothing as how bad restrictive it can become if China decides to take over one by one countries following into the West. Trust me, it could be a much more worse place. Regarding essentially censorship that's going on right now is bad by a mile. And I did tell everyone why censorship is happening. It's first censorship, and then it's going to be CBDC, so they can silence you when they do release CBDCs, and you can't do anything about it. But anyways, if the US doesn't do anything about it right now, then China takes the AI market space, which is going to be bad later on for the US in a digital world later on. So if you're an American citizen and you might be angry that why is the US spending money in Asian countries, it's because they want to control the AI market space from now, so they don't lose control later on. And they're not going to be doing it as a free charity shop either. They're going to be helping these AI countries, and later on, those countries are going to buy chipsets from the US, which means technically the US will get its money back. It's they invest now and they get their money back later. Now, instead of them buying from China regarding the chipsets, they can buy from US on chipsets. Now, Brazil is what we're going to talk about next. Brazil to hold a public hearing on August 20th to discuss creating a strict Bitcoin reserve. The first official Brazilian debate on whether a strict essentially Bitcoin reserve should be established will be held on August 20th, 2025. So Brazil is also going to be having a debate, the same way Italy is having a debate right now, the same way essentially Indonesia is having a debate of should they create a Bitcoin reserve. Brazil is going to be having the same discussions on the 20th of this month. This hearing will be held in the chamber of essentially Brasilia capital, and it will address the Bill 4.501-2024, which suggests the addition essentially of Bitcoin to the National Reserve, which will be under the state jurisdiction. Request the holding of public hearings with the objective essentially of debating PL 4501-2024, which provides for the information of sovereign strict reserves of Bitcoin by the federal government and provides other measures also. The federal deputy Luis Felipe also came in with a perspective. The proposal was first introduced by the deputy Eros in November 2024, as essentially posted to the Economic Development Commission. Deputy essentially Liz Felipe had called the hearing publicly essentially later in June, and this is now to be met by a scheduled session that's going to be happening on August 20th. The bill demands that the Brazilian Treasury begin diversifying its asset holdings by essentially purchasing Bitcoin and other crypto assets that are considered secure. The event will open to experts and to the public, giving key figures a platform to present their views on potential benefits by holding Bitcoin in government reserves. Brazil, the ninth biggest economy in the world, has foreign exchange reserves of nearly $341 billion. If this bill is passed, 5% of their reserves will equals to essentially $17 billion will be channeled into Bitcoin. So if essentially Brazil greenlights a Bitcoin treasury, $17 billion could be entering into Bitcoin's market capitalization and will be channeled into Bitcoin. This would make essentially Brazil the world's largest holder of Bitcoin reserves, replacing countries such as El Salvador, the UK, and Bhutan, which essentially will be Michael Saylor's wet dream. Brazil's move to discuss essentially Bitcoin integration aligns with essentially its growing commitment to digital assets. In June 2023, the country implemented a legal framework that empowers its central banks to regulate and oversee virtual asset service providers. The new framework also clarifies the Securities and Exchange Commission's authority over tokens considered securities. The Brazilian crypto environment is already robust. The country became a leader in the Americans essentially authorizing spot cryptocurrency ETFs. Brazil's currently essentially has a variety of investment options within the country's industry, though essentially these are FOMO 11, which measures the sentiments of the markets, which combines a selection of DeFi tokens. And the next step of the Brazilian Bitcoin reserve will rely upon the conclusion of the open hearing on August 20th. If this Economic Development Commission passes the bill, it will then be passed to Congress and then eventually be signed by the President of Brazil, and it will become law. Brazil is not alone in considering a national Bitcoin reserve. Several other nations have also mentioned to integrate Bitcoin into their financial frameworks. The ongoing discussions come at a time when other nations are also looking into similar paths. An example is the United States, which has been considering the formation of a street Bitcoin reserve. It's been mentioned, but still has not been created. So, Brazil, August 20th, could be greenlighting some sort of a Bitcoin reserve, or maybe not. If they do, if Brazil does greenlight a Bitcoin reserve, they're going to be putting somewhere around 5% into Bitcoin, which will equal to about $17 billion of a Bitcoin purchase, which will put Brazil pretty much at number one, you could say, on the amount of purchase they're going to be making, ahead of multiple countries. And also, as I said, Michael Saylor's wet dream of $17 billion entering into Bitcoin from Brazil. Because if Brazil does it, then other Latin American countries will follow in suit. But it's also a green light. It gives credibility towards the crypto space as well in general. It's not just beneficial for Bitcoin, but adds credibility towards the crypto space in general, which also can open up doors for countries to create a basket of cryptocurrencies. Now, moving off the Brazil, essentially, will they do it, will they not do it, Bitcoin reserve, to Ondo Finance and XRP. Before we talk about that, let's go inside the comment section first, and then we'll go straight into the next news. So let's see where we're at. Sorry about that, everyone. Now, Miles is a goat. Let's go, Scott. Thanks so much for the kind words, brother. Let's see where we're at inside the conversation before we do go inside before we go through the next news on tonight's live is regarding XRP. Great show. Let's go, Curtis. Hi, Miles and CMF. Sorry that I'm a bit late. We'll catch the replay. No problem, Joe. Good to see how you're doing. El Salvador. Like and repost, folks. Let's go, Joe. Miles and repost, folks. Let's go, Joe. Miles, Crypto Goat. Let's go, Scott. Good day, Miles and CMF. Sorry, I'm late. No problem, brother. Good to see you as well, Mike. How you doing? How you been? Now, Ondo Finance, XRP Ledger. They're calling it Wall Street 2.0. So here it is. Ondo Finance all set to launch or to build, essentially to build, and then to launch Wall Street 2.0 on Ripple's XRP Ledger. Ondo Finance is getting ready to essentially build and launch Wall Street 2.0 on the XRP Ledger. Ripple recently featured Ondo Finance's CEO Nathan in a public discussion about bringing tokenized US treasuries like the popular essentially OUSG to the XRP ledger. The conversion is a part of a bigger trend in the industry to connect traditional financial products with faster, more transparent blockchain technology. Now, we've talked about Ondo Finance and Ripple's partnership in the past, but this one is essentially the next step, creating Wall Street 2.0 on the XRP ledger, tokenization of stocks. Nathan, the founder and CEO of Ondo Finance, laid out his firm's strategy to bridge the gap between traditional finance and blockchain. He described the goal as creating a Wall Street 2.0, a new system that combines the established structures of traditional finance with 24/7 accessibility and efficiency of DeFi. Nathan said a key motivation was the stark difference between essentially the old and new systems. Legacy finance often needs multiple days to settle a securities transfer, while decentralized networks can move assets almost instantly. He pointed to the power of essentially DApps that offer single-click access to complex financial services like borrowing and trading, all while users keep control of their own assets. Ondo Finance essentially chose to partner with a network like the XRP Ledger, he said, was because the need of essentially the kind of consistent operational reliability that institutional clients require. I just want to repeat that one more time for everybody in the back. Just listen to this. The reasoning of why Ondo Finance chose a partner like Ripple's XRP Ledger is because he said, the CEO, Ondo Finance, said he was essentially looking for the kind of consistent, operational, reliable, and that institutional clients require. In other words, Ondo Finance is essentially built upon Ethereum's chain, you could pretty much say, and has ties with other companies out there. So they could have easily built, whatever they're building essentially on other chains. But they chose the XRP ledger. And for him to mention, they were looking for reliable, essentially, consistent, operational, and what institutions require, it's the XRP ledger. Ondo's work isn't just happening on one network. It's a part of a larger, essentially, industry push to make tokenized assets work across different blockchains. In a separate, essentially, but related development, the Coral network, Chainlink, has also been making key moves in this area as well. Chainlink's co-founder, Sergey, recently talked about Chainlink Runtime Environment, a system essentially designed to simplify how smart contracts connect with the real-world data and other blockchains. He explained that the platform can cut smart contracts development time frame from months down to just a few days, essentially, or weeks. In a recent test, Chainlink, Ondo Finance, and JP Morgan's Kenix platform work together to show how this works in cross-chain transactions between private permission networks and a public testnet. This shows the growing push, from all corners of the industry towards a more integrated blockchain-based financial system. Ondo Finance mentioning the reasonings of why they chose the XRP ledger and creating Wall Street 2.0. The reasonings of why they chose the XRP ledger, because it's reliable, is because what institutions are looking for is the XRP ledger. It's consistent, it's operational, it pretty much has no downtime. Now, Wall Street 2.0 on the XRP ledger. Moving on, but still keeping on the topic of XRP. XRP's hype score right now is at 86%. Bet on ETF approval as Ripple goes all in for US bank status. So, the platform that some people are familiar with and some people are not familiar with regarding essentially the crypto space, where everybody bets on who is going to be essentially the next president of the United States, who's going to be essentially what law is going to be passed next, or essentially, or so on, is, you could say up to a certain extent, very, very accurate on essentially what the next movements are going to be inside the market space. So why is there a massive hype of 86% that essentially XRP ETFs are on the way? So what explains this high confidence level right now inside the market space? Where is this high confidence coming from, that 86% chance of XRP ETFs happening soon? Well, one, legal clarity surrounding Ripple. In March 2025, the SEC formally dropping its long-standing lawsuit against Ripple, removing any major overhauling essentially for ETF issuers. This legal resolution reduced the regulatory uncertainty and significantly bolstered confidence in XRP-based investment vehicles. 2. The growing number of institutional filings. Leading asset managers including Bitwise, Grayscale, Franklin Templeton, 21 Shares, CoinShares, ProShares, and more have all submitted spot XRP ETF proposals to the SEC. The sheer volume and caliber of these filings suggests sustained institutional conviction in XRP's long-term viability. 3. Futures ETF demonstrates market maturity. The XRP futures essentially has done tremendously well. So imagine what XRP spot ETF is going to be doing. CME Group launched XRP futures ETFs essentially in mid-May this year, drawing more than $542 million in the first month. More recently, ProShares introduced the Ultra XRP ETF, a leveraged product on the New York Stock Exchange, which surged a debut and re-energized the narrative for spot approvals. These developments signal demand and infrastructure maturity that regulators often seek. 4. Public developments and framework shifts. Regulatory momentum has also shifted in favor of crypto ETFs. New legislation suggests that the Genius Act and the SEC commentary essentially from commissioners, especially Hester Pierce, suggest an evolving framework that reduces operational complexities for altcoin ETFs, issuers through in-kind creations and redemption mechanisms. 5. Market behavior and prediction dynamics. Polymarket's 86% figure is underpinned by the real money bets, with total wagered volumes recently exceeding essentially $114,000, reflecting serious investor conviction. Historically, Polymarket's predictions accuracy has exceeded 90%. Just to repeat that one more time, the platform that everybody keeps on using inside the crypto space to bet on what's going to be happening in world events. And let's just be honest, that platform guessed who is going to be the president of the United States before the politician, before CNBC, ABC, and so on even announced it. Historically, Polymarket's predictions accuracy on the betting side of what's going to be happening has exceeded 90%. It has a 90% rate of successfulness regarding which side is being betted on. The high odds also reflect the growing sentiments that the SEC will complete the approval process before December 31st, 2025 resolution deadline. Market implications, an 86% approval probability indicates that widespread optimism. If a spot XRP ETF is approved, institutional capital may flow into XRP as showcased by Bitcoin Ethereum ETFs, which saw tens of billions of dollars of inflows and past approvals. Liquidity and accessibility are set to improve because retail investors will gain essentially regulated exposure to XRP via traditional brokerages and accounts without managing crypto wallets. Price upside could be very significant, with some analysts anticipating XRP might be rising towards $20 to $27 zones straight after the XRP ETF is announced and money inflowing into it, driven by ETF momentum through volatility remains high. Ripple officially files for that banking charter. That is also adding to the factor that essentially XRP ETFs getting approved and the amount of essentially, confidence that's going towards XRP right now. The application with the OCC regarding their banking license. Ripple Labs has formally, submitted its applications to the U.S. Office of essentially OCC, seeking established Ripple Trust National Bank, a limited purpose national trust bank fully owned by the company. Ripple has made volume 1 of its essentially integrity charter application publicly available, offering stakeholders an initial window into the entity's proposed structure and intended operations, Ripple being fully transparent of everything they're doing. This first volume outlines fundamental details, such as the proposed headquarters in New York City, contact information, and public notice announcements in the filings. Volume 1 also makes it clear that Ripple is pursuing a national trust bank charter, which would empower the entity to undertake essentially fiduciary duties, stablecoin reserve management, and institutional custody services, rather than traditional deposit taking or consumer lending activities. These three goal and AMP broader context. For example, Ripple aims to secure a Federal Reserve master account, which would allow it to essentially directly settle payments, hold reserves for a stablecoin RLUSD at the Federal Reserve, and bypass traditional intermediary banks, resulting in faster, more cost-effective essentially settlement systems. Reactions and AMP implications. The American Bankers Association and other also banking groups of America have formally opposed Ripple's charter bid, citing concerns that the crypto-affiliated trust bank might erode customer protections and destabilize traditional banking structures, but that's only because they were scared. However, industry observers noted that under the OCC has adopted a more crypto-friendly posture. In the past, the OCC was very anti-crypto. Obviously, now they're very pro-crypto, so they couldn't care less what the banking world thinks, especially today with the White House coming out with a new executive order regarding any bank inside the United States that decides to stop any sort of fintech companies or crypto companies from progressing, or essentially rejecting them, any sort of banking usage will be penalized by the White House and fined. As majors like Ripple, Circle, and Bitcoin pursue similar charters, just like Ripple's bid puts at the forefront of the broader efforts by crypto firms to breach into regulated finance. With Volume 1 public and the charter filings formalized, Ripple is set to redefine how stablecoins operate under US Federal Reserve oversight, turning ambition into architecture and innovation into institutional integrations. Meanwhile, Polymarket's 86% approval probability for XRP, for spot XRP ETF, reflects a convergence of legal progress, institutional filings, market infrastructure, maturity, and evolving regulatory sentiments. Therefore, this possibility underscores a broad expectation that the US-based spot XRP ETF is increasingly viewed not as a question of if, but when regarding an XRP ETF. In other words, XRP ETF is never going to get rejected. It's always going to be approved, because the amount of things that Ripple has achieved so far and what's going to be achieving later on is just ridiculous. I mean, Ripple is just tearing through any barrier, as I said on yesterday's live. They've achieved so much, they're going to be achieving a lot more, and it's going to be a company that's going to be, reckoning with the forces of JP Morgan, Franklin Templeton, Goldman Sachs, and so on, and even one day BlackRock. As much as people might laugh at that, but I'm not lying. I've always said I always have the last laugh is the easiest way to put it, but honestly, 86% chance of approval, incredible. Ondo Finance mentioning 2.0 Wall Street, even better for XRP. Also, one thing to mention regarding XRP is that there's something going around regarding flare, essentially airdrops on the XRP, essentially flare airdrops for XRP users. Please be aware that there's a lot of scams going around regarding essentially flare airdrops for XRP users. Just please stay away from it is what I would say. I've seen a lot of ads and a lot of posts about flare, essentially airdrops for XRP users. There's too many scams happening out there inside the XRP space. Please be aware and don't just opt in for random airdrops is what I would say. So please be aware of that. And on that note, thank you so much to everybody who tuned in to today's episode, just like always. Honestly, CMF members, I love you all. Thank you so much for tuning in to every episode. This was episode 349 of the CMF Live. Episode 350 will be tomorrow. If you're watching this for the first time ever, this is the CMF Live. It stands for Crypto Mouse Family. You can tune to this live Monday to Friday, 10 p.m. London time onwards for the most recent news regarding cryptocurrency, CBDCs, AI, politics, and regulations. Pretty much vital information for you to know about regarding the world completely transforming into digital space. And today we talked about Ondo Finance and Ripple's footsteps. We talked about how far Ripple has come and the 86% chance of an approval of the ETF. We talked about also on tonight's live regarding Brazil's footsteps on creating a Bitcoin reserve. We talked about the US and essentially the AI race between the US and China. We also talked about on tonight's live regarding the SEC greenlighting stablecoins, which is massive. We also went through news regarding Osaka Exchange, the Japanese exchange, bringing cryptocurrencies into the Japanese market space for institutions to bring in liquidity towards the table. We talked about Trump choosing the two Kevins to lead the essentially Fed. We talked about Indonesia considering a Bitcoin essentially reserve. We talked about how Italy might be considering or might be rejecting a Bitcoin reserve. We talked about how the White House, Donald Trump's administration right now is going to penalize any banks that don't work with crypto companies or reject crypto companies or even reject users who buy cryptocurrencies using their bank accounts. If any bank essentially rejects their users, then the White House will penalize those banks inside the US and fine them for not working with crypto companies or essentially with crypto users. We also talked about tonight's live regarding the Fed and the Bank of America's perspective on that matter. We went through news also on tonight's live regarding the ETF market space. We went through quite a lot of news on tonight's live, and this was episode 349 of the CMF Live. And once again, stay away from the flare airdrops. There's too many scams going around inside the XRP space right now. So before we do go, let's go inside the comment section first, and then we'll call it the night, and we'll come back tomorrow for episode 350 of the CMF Live. Morning, Miles and CMF. Sorry I'm late. I'll watch it back. I've been unwell of late. I'm sorry to hear that, Shelly. I hope you're feeling better. So sorry to hear that. I hope you feel better soon, Shelly. Let's go, Stormy. Night, Miles and CMF. Miles, absolutely unbelievable as normal. Have a good night. Enjoy yourself. Let's go, Addy. See you tomorrow. Sometimes usual. Thanks for the good stuff, Miles. Appreciate it. Let's go, Sampro. See you tomorrow. Sometimes usual. Good night, Miles, and all the CMF. Thank you for the great live and news. Let's go, JP. See you tomorrow. But sometimes usual. Great live, Miles. Always enlightening listening to you. Good night and see you tomorrow. Artistic, see you tomorrow. Sometimes usual as well. Thank you so much for the kind words. Good night, Miles and family. Great live. Many thanks. See you tomorrow. Ian, brother. See you tomorrow. Same time as usual. The good news keeps coming in. Yay. Let's go, Susie. See you tomorrow. Same time as usual. We love you too, bro. Take care, Miles and CMF. Let's go, Ray. See you tomorrow, brother. Same time as usual. Good night, Miles and CMF. See you tomorrow night. Let's go, Mike. See you, brother, tomorrow. Same time as usual. Great information, Miles. Thank you, brother Miles. Let's go, come to see you tomorrow. Same time as usual. Thank you for all the time you put into these live shows every night, Miles. Let's go, JP. See you tomorrow, brother. Same time as usual. Thanks, Miles. Good night, all. Stormy. See you tomorrow. Same time as usual as well. And good night. I will see everybody tomorrow. And by the way, honestly, thank you so much to everybody who has already liked and retweeted this live on X. If you haven't, please like and retweet on X. And if you watch us on YouTube, drop a like as well and a comment outside the live as well. And even a comment on X if you want to as well. Drop a like and retweet. And thank you so much to everybody who has liked and retweeted and followed, essentially liked and retweeted on X and YouTube. And thanks so much to everyone who followed and subscribed to me during this live as well. If you followed me and subscribed to me during this live, welcome to the CMF family. See everybody tomorrow, same timing as usual. And by the way, the disclaimer of this live, as always, is not financial advice, not political advice, and whatever I say is only for entertainment purposes. I will see everybody tomorrow, same timing as usual, for episode 350 of the CMF Live. See everybody tomorrow, same time as usual. Love you all. See you tomorrow, same time as usual. Everybody have a great day or a good night, depending on where you're on.